72 days in the snow, 200 miles from help, and a decision that would haunt the survivors forever. On October 13, 1972, Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 slammed into the Andes Mountains at 11,500 feet. The fuselage cracked open like an egg. 45 people were aboard. In the first moments after impact, the survivors didn't yet understand what the mountain demanded of them. Let me back up. This wasn't a disaster waiting to happen. It was a series of small failures stacking like cards. The Fairchild F-227 was headed from Montevideo to Santiago, Chile, carrying mostly members of a rugby team and their families. The weather was poor. The pilot decided to descend early, thinking he'd cleared the peaks. He hadn't. The aircraft clipped the ridge of a mountain, sheared off its right wing, and tumbled down a glacier. The impact killed the pilot instantly, along with 4 others. 12 more would die that first night from injuries, cold, or both. 33 people were still breathing when the sun came up. Here's what matters: they were stranded. No one knew where they were. The search teams looked for weeks, then called off the effort. The Andes had swallowed them. Down in the wreckage, the survivors rationed chocolate bars and wine. They melted snow for water. They huddled together against nights that dropped below freezing. By week 2, they were starving. The human body can survive weeks without food, but not in a high-altitude freezer. People were dying now from malnutrition and cold. And that's when someone said the unsayable thing out loud. The dead were still there. In the cold, they hadn't decomposed, and they were technically the only protein available. No one wanted to say it first. No one wanted to be the first to do it, but eventually they did. This is where most accounts get theatrical. Let me be precise. This wasn't madness or desperation overriding morality. These were devoutly Catholic young men. They debated it. They prayed. They decided together that the dead would have wanted them to live. That's not a small thing. And so they survived on what the mountain offered, 72 days of it. The cold preserved their bodies and their food supply in a grim equilibrium. Some of the boys kept journals. Reading them now in archives, I might add, you see no guilt. You see discipline. You see the machinery of survival. But here's the thing nobody tells you. They didn't wait passively to be found. By December, 2 of the strongest climbers, Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa, decided to climb out. They had no real equipment, no maps, just a decision and a compass made from a sewing needle and a piece of metal. They climbed for 10 days. Parrado later said it was like walking on the moon, the altitude, the cold, the absolute nothing around them. They nearly died. Twice they turned back. The third time they crested a ridge and saw something, a river. Running water meant civilization. They found a Chilean shepherd on December 20th. The man gave them food and rode to get help. Within hours, helicopters were in the air. By December 22nd, all 16 survivors were airlifted out. The mountain released them. When the world found out what they'd done to survive, the reaction was immediate. Cannibalism, savage, inhuman. Newspapers ran with it for weeks. The church debated whether they'd committed a mortal sin. The survivors had to defend their humanity to people who'd never faced what they faced. But here's what fascinates me and what most accounts gloss over. The survivors didn't become broken, they became advocates. They spoke about what happened with clarity and without shame. Parrado wrote a book. Canessa became a doctor. They reclaimed the narrative. The church eventually forgave them, officially in writing. Survival, the Vatican decided, wasn't a sin, it was grace. The ethics of extreme survival became a case study in philosophy departments worldwide. It still is. What I find most striking, standing here with this archive in front of me, is how the story got flipped. The disaster wasn't the crash. It wasn't the cold or the hunger. The disaster was the judgment, the assumption that ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances had somehow become less human. They didn't. They survived. They climbed. They got out. And then they spent the rest of their lives explaining to a world that wanted to judge them that survival isn't shameful, it's human. The Fairchild wreckage stayed on that glacier for years before being recovered. You can see pieces of it in museums now: aluminum skin, seat frames, the compass they used. Objects, provenance, proof that it all happened. 16 people walked out of that mountain. 45 boarded the plane. That gap, those 29, is what the Andes took. But those 16 lived, they rebuilt, they testified, and in doing so they rewrote what we think survival actually means. Subscribe. Every week we uncover the decisions that split survival from tragedy, and the stories that change how we understand human limits.